All right, folks, welcome. My name is Jen from Golden State Times. As you guys can see, there's like 5 seats in the front. That's because there was another panel before this event, and that panel was regarding the Me Too movement, and now hopefully they're going to get some of the seats taken away because there's only supposed to be 3. We have the guy, what's his name? His name is Sam Seder, I believe, from the Majority Report. He's also from a bunch of other things, but he's known for the Majority Report. And Charlie Kirk. Charlie was out here somewhere. I don't know where he went. Oh, okay. See, as you guys can see, here, hold on. They're starting to take all the other chairs out of the way. All right, folks, so this is the live stream for Charlie Kirk and Sam Seder. Hopefully the stream stays up and is perfect. And I hope that there's no issues. After this, folks, right after this, we actually have to leave this early a little bit to get to the guy from the Young Turks, the main guy, Cenk Uygur, I believe, and also Cenk. All right, Cenk Uygur. And also Tucker Carlson. They're going to be a debate later on. It's at another hall. Right now we're at something called Liberty Hall, and then we have to go to Civic Hall, which we need to hurry up and do that right after this. So hopefully we can get there in time and get you guys a good shot, but it's going to be tough. So just note that this might end up a little bit earlier than normal, but it's because we need to get to Tucker Carlson. That is going to happen right after. So if you guys would like to support Golden State Times, then you guys can do so by the link in the description below to PayPal, or you can go to paypal.me/GST live. Thank you so much for all of your help. You can also help during on the chat with the super chat. And we need as much help as we can get, folks. We're trying to do Politicon. We're trying to do Trump rallies. So thank you so much. And someone told me to do this earlier. Let me see if I can find my... I'll do it in a little bit. But anyways, so it should start in just a few minutes. Thank you so much. Oh, I forgot to say, please share the live stream on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Gab, any of those social medias. That would be amazing. Also, please make sure to smack the thumbs up button. That helps out the channel. And share this with your friends because it's going to be good. Charlie Kirk is in the building. I just saw him a few minutes ago, and I asked him how he was feeling for this event. Oh, here we go.
Welcome to the debate between Charlie Kirk and Sam Seder. So for those who don't know me, my name is Stephen Olikara. I'm the founder of a nonpartisan organization called the Millennial Action Project. I'm honored to be back at Politicon for the 4th year, and we've got a great debate for all of you discussing the middle class and whether Trump has been helpful or hurtful to the middle class, and we'll debate all of that here. My one request of the panelists is that we want to have an exchange of ideas, and so we want to focus on the substance, avoid personal attacks, and my request on behalf of the audience here is that we don't yell over each other because then they won't be able to understand what you're saying. So are we on board with that?
Yes.
Yes.
We do.
All right. Very good. Are you all ready to get started? Okay. So again, we're here talking about the middle class, and I think perhaps the most consequential piece of legislation that President Trump passed related to this was the tax bill last year. So I'm going to start with Sam. What was your take on the tax bill, and more broadly, do you think Trump has been helpful to the middle class?
Well, let me answer your second question first. No. I don't think he's been particularly helpful for the middle class. I don't think that across the board, I'm sure there are some measures perhaps, but across the board, net, things are not better for the middle class now, and certainly down the road they're going to be a lot worse because of policies that we've seen at least in the first 2 years of this administration. 65% of the tax cuts went to the top 20% of the country. This was, in nominal terms, the biggest tax cut for the middle class in history, or at least recent memory. But at the end of the day, if I turn Charlie's microphone up from a 5 to an 8, and mine from a 5 to a 12 or a 10, that is the dynamic that we have going here with incredible wealth inequality, middle class losing out in terms of wages versus inflation, certainly at least in the first 18 months of the Trump administration versus the last 18 months of the Obama administration, where it was basically flipped. And with increased wealth inequality, you get things like middle class being priced out of the housing market in the top 10 metropolitan areas across the country. You see it in other areas as well. So broadly speaking, at least in terms of the tax cuts, it provides some very inefficient stimulus to the economy, but no, this was for the very wealthy.
Charlie, your response. I first want to say, Sam, I think you always come about your ideas very thoughtfully, so I look forward to this discussion, sincerely. So.
Me too, thank you.
No. And so the first thing, I would come from the argument that Trump has helped the middle class, and let me build it out in a couple ways. First of all, you did say it was the largest middle class tax cut in recent memory. Now, that's not saying a lot, because there hasn't been done a lot for the middle class, but let's define what exactly we mean by the middle class. The middle class, in some ways, is a uniquely American concept. The way that most people would label the middle class, and you could have your own definition, is you have the comfort to send your child to a relatively good school, and your child's life has a greater than likelihood chance that will be better than your life. That you have a median income that allows you to live comfortable, that you could take maybe 1 to 2 vacations a year, and that you don't have to have an insurmountable amount of debt. Now, that being said, when Americans are polled, anywhere between 70 to 90% of Americans think they're middle class, which, of course, only 50% of Americans are middle class. So it's really amazing to see the separation of data of how many people think they're middle class versus how many people actually are middle class. The reason that I would say for that is that we have an elevated standard of living in this country that goes beyond just income, and goes actually that people that are earning $30,000 to $40,000 a year have access to higher quality goods that in other countries they wouldn't. But let's talk about the Trump tax cut in particular. First of all, there's a lot of demonization against corporations and against businesses. When businesses thrive, they have to employ people. And so 3.5 million jobs have been created since the start of the Trump administration. Most of those are middle-class jobs. Wages have gone up about 3.8% in the last year. They were flatlining under the Obama presidency. My favorite number...
I'm sorry,
well,
that's not true. Excuse me?
Hey, hold on. I'm running the panel
here. You
here.
can't do what you just did.
Excuse me.
Well, but
I'm not going to sit here
Sam,
and have lies about facts. Everybody has a phone. Google middle-class wages. See if they're stagnant versus inflation.
So 3.8% wage increase over the last year for the median worker. Hispanic income is at its highest level in American history at $50,000 a year. My favorite number of the Trump administration is that 3.9 million people have gone off food stamps and into the labor force. 3.9 million people. Now, why is that my favorite number? For us conservatives, we do not judge success by how many people go on government programs, but instead of how many people go off into independence. Now, I will not say that our economy is at its optimal level. I think it's the best economy in a generation. You look at a 4.2% GDP growth, 3.7% unemployment rate. And so if you judge the middle class by two major things, which is standard of living increase, of which you're seeing that happen dramatically, and the second of which is education. We have a lot of work to do on the education side. I think you and I would both agree on that. We could have an extended conversation about that on policy. But the economic metrics are so good that the New York Times says, quote, "This economy is so good, we're running out of ways to critique it." And so, again, it's not a perfect economy, but for middle-class Americans that care about rising wages, creating jobs, and tax cuts, the average American family had a $2,700 tax cut under this Trump tax cut. That's good for consumer spending power, that's good for savings, and it's good for, of course, what you would say is more demand-side economics, coupled with supply-side economics that created jobs and repatriated trillions of dollars of wealth back to America.
So everyone here has a phone, and they can Google the first 18 months of the Trump administration versus the last 18 months of the Obama administration. Wages have gone up 1.7% under the first 18 months of the Trump administration. Inflation is up 3.8%. That is simply a fact. Now, if you narrow the time horizon, you can come up with numbers that you're talking about. And this is why people have to be careful about statistics, because I can come up here and manipulate anything. Yes, Latino wages are up. In fact, the middle class is making more money today than in $61,000 than in the past. However, like I say, inflation is up. The cost of higher education has gone up 110% since 1994. So it doesn't matter if the middle class is making $61,000 if to lead the middle class life that you were talking about is that much more expensive. If the middle class liked the tax cuts, they wouldn't disfavor them far greater than they do even Obamacare at this point, right? I mean, so the bottom line is, we can throw out statistics, but if they're not contextualized, it doesn't matter.
Okay, so
everyone knows the tax cuts went to the wealthy. Am I demonizing them? No. The point is that they have an inordinate amount of wealth and income in this country, and it turns into political power. And I know you have a problem with that. And the way to solve that is to flatten the tax, is to not give them tax cuts and more power, and give corporations more power and cash to pay off their shareholders, which tend to be the board of directors and the CEOs, but rather to spread the wealth.
So, okay. There are some things I agreed with. However, to contextualize it further, it doesn't make the economic growth, the economic success any less exceptional or any less historic, because
it's following the same trajectory as the Obama administration.
Hold on a second.
It goes like this.
Okay, so
he hasn't screwed it up.
Sam, I routinely restrain myself during your comments to allow you.
Thank you for that, Charlie.
And that's a big deal for me. If you watched yesterday,
feel free to interrupt me when you think I've said something wrong.
If that you heard it, everyone heard it. Okay, so. I want to walk through a couple points there. The first of all, the big misconception that I have with your original analysis is that just because someone gets rich, someone got poor. That is categorically false. If a wealthy person increases their net worth, they did not exploit someone to get wealthier. They had to take a risk, employ a bunch of people, buy a building, have a really good idea, and people had to continue to buy those products over and over again. And you and I will have a philosophical and economic difference in this. I come from a perspective that does not believe in the zero-sum game and does not believe in the fixed pie fallacy. Instead, I believe that when someone gets richer, they must employ an extraordinary amount of people. They had to take a huge risk. They had a higher than likelihood chance not to succeed. They probably borrowed money, and then they had to create something that all of us had to buy over and over and over again. That inherently allows the standard of living to increase for all people, prices to usually go down, and then you enter competition. It's very, very difficult to do that time and time again, and you see in market-based economies, you have to have really, really good ideas for a long period of time to accumulate that kind of wealth. With that being said, those that get wealthy because of access to power, such as 8 out of the 10 wealthiest counties in America around Washington, D.C., they're not actually creating anything that I would consider to be of value to the middle class, because they're being rewarded to their geographic proximity to a $4.4 trillion federal budget that is extracting money away from middle-class Americans. Those are the lobbyists, those are the trial lawyers, those are the people working for the corporations that are lobbying not on behalf of middle America, but on behalf of people around Washington, D.C. So in that, you and I will agree.
Well, okay.
Maybe not.
The people who live in the counties you're talking about are overwhelmingly arms sales and military-industrial complex people.
I'm not
the
defending
Trump administration raised the budget of the military
I don't agree with
by $700 billion over the next 10 years.
But Sam,
that money's flowing into those. Is that right or wrong?
I don't agree with that, though. So I will have a consensus
well,
that
but my point is Donald Trump is the one who is leading that extraction of wealth.
So first of all,
but let me finish.
Didn't you say I can interrupt you if you said
if
something?
I said something wrong?
Yes. So it's only $700 billion of our budget every single year. What's the rest? It's to entitlements. It is to the federal bureaucracies. How about the government contracts for housing and urban development? The government contracts for health and human services.
Well, you were talking
what about
the
government contracts? Yeah. So those counties that get the government contracts outside of the defense contracts are also what I put my critique on.
Minuscule. The
$3.2 trillion is not minuscule.
It's a made-up number. Let's talk Kansas for a moment, shall we? Because you can talk about what a small business does for employment. I'm a small businessman, and I understand what small business does. In Kansas, if I had been living in Kansas, I would have gotten a huge tax break because I'm an S corp. Huge. Under Sam Brownback back in 2012. He brought in Arthur Laffer, who I'm sure you're familiar with, is the god for folks like you in many respects. The idea being, if we cut taxes on the wealthy, they will spread this wealth. It will trickle down on all of us. It will shower down on us, right? It will rain upon us. And we will all be sprinkled with this golden shower, if you will. And the economy will explode. And people will have jobs, and everything will work out. In fact, revenue will go up. That's what Mitch McConnell told us after this tax cut, too. And what happened in Kansas was a disaster. It was such an unmitigated disaster. Not only did it destroy Kansas's educational system, the Republican-controlled State House rose taxes 4 years later because their economic growth lagged, their employment lagged, and then Sam Brownback was literally made ambassador to like ether, right? He's like the ambassador to religion now. He's been jettisoned into the atmosphere in some way because that is the perfect example of the Republican conservative philosophy, and it failed. And we know that it's failing now on a national level.
Can I chip in here?
Because Mitch McConnell made the same promise about the deficit. In fact, Larry Kudlow, the chief economic advisor of the president, made this same promise in July. And we now have a deficit that is twice the size it was when Obama left office. And now Mitch McConnell wants to cut Medicare and Social Security because of those taxes.
You're not going to hear me. You're not going to hear me defend federal deficits or our exploding national debt. Quick fact: Barack Obama added more debt than any other president in U.S. history. He doubled the national debt.
Do you defend these tax cuts that have doubled the deficit?
So the tax cuts should have been coupled with spending cuts. However, we have explosive economic growth. We have more people in the labor force than ever before.
That's revenue coming in.
We have trillions of dollars repatriating back to America. Let me finish. I allowed you to have your Kansas example. Now that we're talking about states, let's talk about the juxtaposition of the failed state of California with the successful state of Texas. And I think I want a country that's going to look a lot more like Florida and Texas and a lot less like Illinois and California. Now, what have states like Illinois and California done? Well, they're losing citizens, number one. They're losing job creators. They're losing entrepreneurs because they have raised taxes. They have reckless politicians in both states like Illinois and California. What have Texas and Florida done? They've kept their taxes low. Both have no state income tax. They have deregulated their economies, and Sam would even agree with that. Texas, during the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, 2010, comprised 1 out of 3 of all jobs created across the country. And if you couple that with if you juxtapose that, if you will, with Illinois, that in the Midwest is booming except Illinois. Every state in the Midwest has a 3% GDP growth. Illinois has a 1.8% GDP growth, despite Chicago being an exceptional city that's being screwed up by corrupt politicians and one political party. And you look at California, that should be the most prosperous, that should be the richest state in the country. And yes, you'll say it is the richest country. It also is the most populous country with the most amount of homeless people, with the most amount of people living in poverty, with crumbling schools. Let me finish, Sam. I know you got plenty of differences, but as long as if you want to talk about states, allow me to address the Kansas example. Kansas, if you look at Kansas versus a state like Connecticut, Kansas had higher economic growth and was creating more jobs versus similar size, similar population blue states during the Brownback tax cuts. There were a lot of other contributing factors to why Kansas was not exactly a pristine example of how to run a state, such as government corruption, such as misallocation of resources, and other diminishing businesses that went to states like Texas that had a zero state income tax. And so if you want to talk about the contrast to states, it's the red states that are rated 9 out of 10 of the most pro-business states in America have Republican governors and Republican legislatures. The most pro-growth states in America are run by Republicans. I'm glad you mentioned it, though.
The reason why I bring up Kansas is because the dynamic is identical to the one that Donald Trump, and this is what we're talking about, that Donald Trump and the Republicans did on a national level. Now, here's how the game works, and this is why it is zero-sum. Because you give these massive tax cuts to the wealthy, and you repatriate money from overseas that ends up going into shareholder buybacks, to stock buybacks. We know that 84% of stocks in this country are owned by the top 10%.
This is a great point. I want to.
Great. And 60% of those tax dollars that were repatriated went into the hands of those people. We saw no job growth as a function of that repatriation. We saw none of the trickle down that we're supposed to see. We see these tax cuts, and then Mitch McConnell brings down the hammer. We're going to cut Social Security. We're going to cut Medicare. These are the most popular, the most successful programs in the country, and the only way the Republicans can cut them is to create an economic crisis, and that is by giving money to wealthy people.
Okay, so let's talk about the stock buyback. So let's talk about the stock buyback. So you say 84%. What that doesn't contextualize, to use your word, is money managers that are controlling money for pension funds. So
that does include
no, it doesn't.
pension funds,
Sam, it does
401k.
Not. Sam, it does not.
Look it
Goldman
up,
Sachs controls money for the California State Pension Fund. It's categorized as Goldman Sachs controlling that money, not as the pension fund. So when the stock market goes up, the teachers, the firefighters, the police officers, their 401ks go up, their pensions go up, and their net worth goes up. So when the stock market explodes, the net. Sam, I allowed you to finish.
You're lying.
Okay, so what's
Google it.
No. So when a money
Google
manager, for example, when GCTR partners from Chicago, Sam, answer the question. When Goldman Sachs controls the California State Pension Fund, is it classified as the California State Pension Fund buying the securities or Goldman Sachs buying the securities? Goldman Sachs. So when you use, you know that's true.
84%. I will tell you what the number is.
Okay.
Google it.
Again, so
84%
your number
of
is
stocks
correct.
in this country.
However, to add context to it, Sam, is that the money manager is in the 1%, but the money they're managing is pension fund money that are people in the middle class. So what you're saying is not incorrect, but it's only half true because it is the middle class people's money that they're managing. With that being said, let's use an example. Zero evidence that repatriation created any jobs. I'll use a microcosm example. How about Foxconn that created 4,000 jobs in Wisconsin because they repatriated the money away from Chinese manufacturing jobs to American manufacturing jobs. 4,000 new jobs were created in Wisconsin because of the Trump tax cut that they directly attributed to a pro-business, pro-American mindset. That's 4,000 jobs in Wisconsin that otherwise did not exist under a Republican governor, Republican state legislature, and a president. Now, that's a microcosm example. You said there's zero evidence. That's a piece of evidence.
Well, look. People can look at the last time a Republican president repatriated that money. It was the American Jobs Creation Act, 2005. George Bush promoted this. He has come out and subsequently said that he got rolled because all those companies that wanted that to supposedly add jobs cut jobs. We know these money went to buybacks. We know why buybacks are illegal now because of the Republican Party changed that regulation in the 80s when it used to be called stock manipulation. And we know that it benefits the CEOs and the shareholders, and that 84%. And it does not. It includes the California pensions. It includes every municipal and state pension and 401k in the country. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So, but here's another thing I do want to talk about, because you talk about, can you explain to me, when someone gets richer, who exactly gets poorer? Can you explain how that process works? Like for example, when
I'll explain to you.
So who gets?
So folks, you understand the idea of buying power, right? If I give you, ma'am, $10 and school costs $10, you buy a school. But if school goes up to $20, then you don't have the same buying power. What drives the price of, let's say, housing, for instance? It is wealth inequality. And you see this in 10 cities across the country, the biggest metropolitan areas in the country. The middle class cannot afford to live there anymore because we have real estate going through the roof.
You're right. And so you have in states such as Illinois and Connecticut and California, because of excessive property taxes, people don't want to purchase some of those houses. So you have one of two problems that happen. Is that the middle class gets priced out. So the wealthy, if you will, the people that you are demonizing, will go up a bracket, and they'll say, well, if I'm going to pay $35,000 a year in property taxes, I might as well buy this XYZ house. Therefore, the middle class person who's trying to sell their house with an excessive property tax burden has to property taxes are one of the main reasons.
I'm a homeowner. I know what taxes are, and
Right.
they're not nearly as much as if the price goes up.
Again, so in states like Illinois, property taxes can be anywhere between 6.5% to 9% for a state that doesn't work, for schools are completely and totally broken. So, but like, the foreign investment thing. So I'm still trying to get back. Let me go back to the zero-sum game. When an entrepreneur renders a service and employs a bunch of people, and you buy that service, who is getting poorer in that transaction? Because you said zero-sum game. I'm trying to understand in a market
about
economy.
tax cuts.
No, you're right. So tax cut, where an average middle-class family had a $2,700 tax cut, where you have the corporate rate that went from 35% effective. I understand a lot of corporations did not pay that. They used loopholes, of which I disagree with completely. Went down to 20% effective in January. And they used that money to invest in capital infrastructure, or they repatriate
Stock
jobs.
buybacks.
So
they're using the money to buy
not exclusively. So stock buybacks. How about companies where the actual employees own the stock and their own net worth goes up? Aren't they part of the middle class?
I am sure there are some members of the middle class who benefited from the tax cut.
That's what I'm saying, Sam.
The overwhelming thrust of the tax cuts goes in to the wealthiest pockets via either stock buybacks or through capital gains or through having an S corp and paying less in taxes. So look, we could cherry pick things. You can say Illinois. I could say the worst 16, the lowest 15 states in the country in terms of education are all run by Republican governors, except for Louisiana, which had Bobby Jindal for 8 years up until 2016. But cherry picking doesn't work. You wouldn't. There's a lot of things.
The
about
idea of zero-sum game, though, the zero-sum game.
You wouldn't like me to cherry pick.
That's why I was trying to get to the philosophical difference, because I don't believe when someone gets rich, someone
Well,
inherently
you can
gets
talk
more
philosophy, but we don't need to.
But
we have data.
Okay, but the data, right? So the data. Fine, Sam. If you want to talk data.
And Charlie, I'm going to give you the last word on this.
Yeah, but I mean, so again, I was thinking maybe because again, you were just talking about cherry picking. And then you were cherry picking, and I was trying to talk about philosophy, which is I don't believe in a zero-sum game. I believe in a market economy. When you trade, both parties equally get richer when you trade, and standard of living goes up, prices go down, and you have abundance. You have an abundance problem, not a scarcity problem in the West. But so I'm trying to maybe I'm failing to understand how, because the left seems so adamantly opposed to the policies that have delivered us a 4.2% GDP rate, the lowest ever black unemployment rate, the lowest ever Asian American unemployment rate, the lowest Hispanic unemployment rate, the lowest veterans unemployment since 2001, a $2,700 average middle class tax cut, and the economy is so good, Obama's trying to take credit for it. And so, but Sam, can you give some credence to the idea that when you lessen government burden, you couple that with a massive deregulation, the largest deregulation agenda in 100 years, are you willing to give an inch to say that maybe something Trump has done has benefited the well-being of people in the middle class?
All right. Well, you keep repeating the same thing, and I keep explaining.
And it doesn't make it less true, Sam.
Well, it makes it. I'm explaining to you why it's irrelevant. Because, yes, there has been a trajectory where we have seen all of the unemployment gains that you've talked about. We have seen stagnant wages. That is a fact. The buying power of the middle class has dropped. You talk about rolling back regulations. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's good. Let's talk about that. I'm glad.
I want you to name 3 regulations that have been rolled back that have helped the middle class. And I'll name 3 that have hurt the middle class.
How about rolling back Obama's war on coal?
Okay.
That has created hundreds of thousands of jobs throughout Appalachia and brought down utility costs in over 30 states.
What?
Yes, so this is a big...
People laughing in the front from West Virginia.
I smile and I'm happy when the people of West Virginia actually have jobs, unlike what Hillary Clinton said, we're going to destroy all your jobs and we're going to find another way to give you meaning.
That's one.
And also, if you go through the EPA agenda, there was a specific regulation under the Obama era that categorized lakes and tributaries in the backyards of certain farmers as oil spills. That's number 2. And
I'm sorry, wait, walk us through this. By saying you can't dump.
Yes, Sam,
chemicals?
being condescending about a fact does not make it any less true. So under the Obama era.
Well, wait a second. I'm just asking you, walk us through how having farmers dump pesticides in tributaries.
Okay, that's not what I said. They classified lakes and tributaries in the backyards of certain farms as oil spills, which is a complete miscategorization and abuse of the Clean Water Act of 1976. So that was a abuse of power under what I like to call the Employment Prevention Agency.
And how many jobs do you
the Environmental Protection Agency
that were created by that?
Well, it definitely saved all these farmers hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal costs and the fact that they can still be operating. Would you like more regulation, Sam? How about
one more?
How about the thousands of consumer regulations that were finally rolled back under the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau so that we do not have to go through excessive amount of regulation to get small business loans? Happy to defend that any single day. I'm happy to defend the deregulatory agenda of Trump against the excessive regulatory agenda of Obama.
So
there's 3.
First off, all right, so first off, let's just start with this. Donald Trump has not rolled back that many regulations. That's the reality. The rate in which our regulations have grown has definitely been slowed. He's done about half of new regulations that Obama and Bush did up to this point. That is true. But let's talk first about the regulation that you mentioned in terms of the coal-fired power plants. This will cause 3,600 deaths, 90,000 cases of asthma, 1,700 heart attacks. The expenses associated with this are in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The mercury and air toxins rollback will cause 11,000 deaths annually. The asbestos rollbacks will cost up to 40,000 annual deaths. The EPA, the Trump EPA, says that for every one regulation, $1 worth of regulation that costs an industry or whatnot, $14 of economic growth are generated. What's an example of that? Light bulbs. For years, conservatives were angry about light bulbs. I don't know if people here are old enough to remember this. But the idea that the U.S. government would require more efficient light bulbs was the loss of liberty to a scope that we can't even imagine. What has happened is consumers have saved tens of millions of dollars because they don't have to replace these incandescent light bulbs. We've seen in terms of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau saved consumers $90 million worth of bank fees in the last year of the Obama administration alone.
There
has not been one enforcement action since the Trump administration has taken over.
So what's the CFPB budget?
What is the budget? It is completely funded by fees that they get from the bank.
Okay, so forcibly take money away from the people that are depositor and then say that they're saving $90 million of fees on the back end.
That's not the way it works.
No,
when you deposit your money,
so the banks make money by people putting money in it, and then they borrow it out. So those are depositors. So you're taxing the depositors to then put on the back end of a government agency that is run in and the CFPB should be completely abolished. It's an unconstitutional agency. And it's used as a weapon.
Bankers do not loan out their depositors' money exclusively. That's why you have capital controls. They loan out a lot
exclusively.
More.
That is one form and function of a bank.
But it goes back to you.
Well, obviously it goes back to, most of the money in your bank's actually not in there, Sam? You know that,
yes.
Right? Okay, that's the way a bank works. So you have the FDIC that insures it up to a certain amount, but that money is probably somewhere else in the economy on loan or on lien to somewhere else to try to make the bank money. So when you're taxing the bank to try to fund the CFPB, you're actually taxing the depositors. You're taxing the money within the bank. The bank is comprised of the people that put the money in the bank.
No, you're taxing the profits they make off of their loan.
And they make So let's talk about banking. So first of all, they make money off of.
Let's stay with regulation.
Okay, Sam, they make money. They make money off of most of the money that banks used to make until Dodd-Frank was off lending to small businesses and local communities. But Dodd-Frank completely obliterated the idea of the local community bank. We have seen a sharp decline in community banks.
We have not seen a sharp decline in community banks unless you look over the past 30 years where we have seen a precipitous decline in those banks because of mergers and acquisitions.
Right. So we've saw it. I will repeat myself because it's correct. Since the financial crisis, Dodd-Frank was a weapon used against small community banks that has hundreds of millions of dollars of regulation that put on small and local community banks. You know who loves Dodd-Frank? You know who's lobbying against the repeal of Dodd-Frank? Something that you and I can agree with. Goldman Sachs, which completely own the Treasury Department in both administrations, by the way, whether it be the Bush administration, the Obama administration, or the Trump administration. Goldman Sachs has an inside-out access to the Treasury Department. They are lobbying against a repeal of Dodd-Frank. Now, why would that possibly be? Because Dodd-Frank is used as a hedge against small and community banks to protect the Wells Fargos of the world, the J.P. Morgan Chases, and the Goldman Sachs. And so they use regulation as a competitive edge.
Will you join me in calling for a 21st century Glass-Steagall Act? We can deal with government. We can deal with government.
I would actually. I think we should get rid of the carried interest deduction. I think you and I could agree in that.
That's completely different from what I've just asked you.
Well, it's a component of what many people on your say. No, I will not join you in a 21st century Glass-Steagall Act. No.
Why?
All right, hold on, guys.
If you want to cut down on the power of the big banks, why wouldn't you?
Well, okay, so you would.
If you're sincere,
why
wouldn't
walk me through
one way that would actually cut in to the size and the power of those banks?
Because it wouldn't do that. Because every single time you try to penalize the power of Wall Street, every single time you try to use government to go after the people that have the power, the exact opposite happens. You have an oligarchic class that is created around Washington, D.C., and the biggest companies get more powerful, and it totally pushes out competition.
You mentioned the financial crisis. The financial crisis
was a product
of the rollback of Glass-Steagall during the Clinton administration.
Incorrect. I'll let you do your case of why you think 2008 happened, and I'll tell you what really happened.
Well, it was not the cause of 2008 of the initial crisis. It was the cause of the severity of the crisis because we allowed commercial banks and investor banks to commingle. And they were too big to fail, and it almost pulled our entire financial system under. And so you return to a day which existed pre-96, where these banks cannot commingle. If one of them fails, it's a problem, but it's not one that is going to throw our entire economy into jeopardy. That is why the debt increased during Obama years, because the economy fell off a cliff. And so if you want to diminish the power of Goldman Sachs and of Citibank and Wells Fargo, and we can agree on this, Let's call for a 21st century Glass-Steagall Act. We can do something bipartisan. This will be great. And we can actually diminish the power of these banks.
So I will say you'd actually find more acceptance of that argument in me than most people, because I think there is some merit to the argument that the repeal of Glass-Steagall did open up the reckless behavior of banks. However, I would say in talking about 2008, it was not the primary factor nor the secondary factor of why that financial crisis was created. It was first and foremost Fannie and Freddie, which is a government-sponsored institution that has yet to be held accountable, that has never showed their books to the taxpayers. AAA bond rating crap. AAA bond rating mortgages where people had FICO credit scores that were beyond F, that had median income around $35,000 a year, never actually visiting the houses that they were giving the mortgages to. It was B and B minus loans that they were looping together a AAA bond rating, and they were in bed with the rating agencies. So I think Sam and I would agree that there was widespread collusion. Fannie and Freddie is not Wall Street. It is a government institution that Congress sanctioned, had yet to be held them accountable.
Fannie and Freddie. You're right. I mean,
they're government.
It's a quasi-government function, but it's enough. But Fannie and Freddie entered into that subprime market 4 years after all the major banks did. Believe me,
but Sam,
you were in high school at this time. I can assure you.
Sam, let me finish.
I paid attention to this. Now,
can I finish the point?
Well,
or are you going to argue? Are you going to continue to argue from authority?
The banks gave bad loans. We need more regulation so they uphold their fiduciary duty.
Okay, so let's. I want to finish the point on the financial crisis. You couple that.
I want to get to trade and tariffs after that.
The Community Reinvestment Act, which incentivized these banks to give loans to low-income communities. The Community Reinvestment Act, you can read the actual language of the bill, had quotas for banks over a certain level to give these loans out. You triple that with Alan Greenspan artificially lowering interest rates after 9/11. So you had cheap money flowing all around, and all of a sudden people said, oh, you can't question the housing market. It's as stable as can be. When you looked at the mortgages that Fannie and Freddie were AAA rating, a government agency, the banks were trading off the...
Fannie and Freddie did not do the ratings.
Sam,
the ratings were by three agencies that were not government agencies.
Sam,
Moody's,
Fannie and Freddie, the banks were trading off the confidence that Fannie and Freddie gave them because they said, oh, but Fannie and Freddie is trading it. Oh, my goodness, we could trade it. So then Goldman Sachs never actually looked through the mortgages because first and foremost, they were incentivized to do it. They had the cheap money from the government. And finally, they had the confidence and the conviction, which was all false, by a government agency to trade on these loans to destabilize our economy. Now, the bankers that lied, like the Wells Fargo's executives that lied, they should be in prison. And I agree on that.
If there was a scrawl underneath here, it would be really embarrassing for you, because everyone who knows anything about banking knows that there were three rating agencies. Their names were not Fannie Mae and not Freddie Mac.
I never said they were a rating agency. They were trading them as AAA bond rated. And they were said
who
these
rated them?
They were rated by the three rating agencies.
Right. Are those agencies government agencies?
So what did Fannie and Freddie issue
yes
to
or no?
JP Morgan?
Yes or no?
They are not government agencies.
That's
independent.
right.
They're independently governed. Hold on. Who is supposed to regulate them? Sam, hold on a second. Who is supposed to regulate them? Did the SEC do their job in regulating them? No.
Part of Dodd-Frank.
I thought the SEC was supposed to keep us safe. It's the biggest government failure of the modern era. The SEC that has a $30 billion budget every single year did not even walk into these rating agencies and say, show me these mortgages. Show me the FICO scores. Show me how they're 18 months delinquent on
Dodd-Frank. If you're arguing that regulators were not on the ball, you and I agree. There should be stricter regulation.
I'm arguing that's what happens when you continue to add these layers and layers of regulation, and then you blame capitalism for it. You're like, oh, you have all these regulators that used to work at Goldman, they used to work at Credit Suisse, they used to work at Wells Fargo. They go work for Fannie and Freddie. They go work for the regulators. Right. They say, oh, it's just a failure of capitalism, despite government being on AAA bond ratings.
I understand you. The failure of regulation to regulate the capitalists who gambled with money that was putting our entire economy in jeopardy. The failure of those regulators to do their job, the answer to that is to have no regulation and just let it be completely wild west.
So I know, first of all, Dodd-Frank does the exact opposite of it, number one. Number two, the answer
Dodd-Frank tried to regulate.
So first of all, you know what the solution is? Sam, I'm so glad you asked. You want to know what the solution is? The solution is we should have let the banks fail and make them pay a price for gambling with our money. That's the solution. Because they won't do it again, Sam. if you bail them out and you give the Wall Street executives huge bonuses, and the Wells Fargo executives should be in prison. You and I agree with that.
Yes.
They gambled with our
Yes.
money.
Yes.
But you don't have
I agree.
recourse. You don't have punishment. They're going to do it again.
Yes, I agree. If you don't punish them, they'll do it again. Or if you let them have the regulatory space to do it again, they'll do it again.
No, so that's where you and I disagree. It wasn't the regulatory space. It was Fannie and Freddie that paved the way. They were the ones they were the number one distributor of these falsely labeled AAA bonds. They never actually saw the mortgages they were trading. Fannie and Freddie to this day, they've never opened their books.
Okay.
We fund them, and they have never opened their books.
We do not. Listen, the bottom line is the reason why we had such a severe crisis was because of the relationship between the commercial banks and the investment banks. Fannie and Freddie bought those mortgages from those banks 4 years after the run started. I agree with you that you have some of the elements correct. You don't understand the role of Fannie and Freddie in that crisis, but it's largely irrelevant to the point I'm making, which is the crisis was as severe as it was because we rescinded Glass-Steagall under a Democratic president and a Republican Congress. We could go back and we could, today, we could reinstitute it and save the banks. A guy like Steve Mnuchin, I agree with you. He should be in jail. He did this stuff.
I'm not going to talk to Steve personally, but I think where we could agree, where Sam and I agree, is there's something fundamentally wrong that somehow a prerequisite to run the Treasury Department is working at Goldman Sachs. There's something wrong with that. And that is cronyism, not capitalism. Now, Sam will say, well, that's what happens when you allow capitalism. I would completely and totally...
Well, when you have corporations gain so much money and power, they're too big, and we need to make them smaller.
I had 4 seconds of an agreement moment, so I want you all to remember.
How does the market make these entities that have too much power smaller?
Competition. Because you know why?
Who's keeping someone from competing with Amazon? Who's keeping someone from competing with Google?
Oh, okay, so I'm glad you asked.
Who's keeping someone?
Nobody, but you know who's keeping them from? You know who's trying to compete? Who's preventing them from keeping to prevent against Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan? The Dodd-Frank bill, because it has so much regulation and such cumbersome rules, it disallows the local community bank from ever competing against them.
The local community bank is going to compete against Goldman Sachs?
Oh, wait, hold on. I'm so glad
They've all been bought.
That's a great question. Where did these banks start from them, Sam? Where did Wells Fargo start? It started as a local community bank that eventually did a very good job of running their balance sheets, and then they became one of the Wall Street banks. It's not unheard of that
when there was no Dodd-Frank.
Exactly right. It was before Dodd-Frank, Sam.
Right. And they were not allowed to merge until that 96.
No, again, I think there is some merit to your Glass-Steagall argument. I do not think that is the primary factor why 2008 happened, nor would I say that reinstating Glass-Steagall will have competition back on Wall Street. We will get competition back on Wall Street when we decentralize the SEC, when we decentralize the FDIC. We make it easier for people to give out loans and have FDIC deposit insurance backing. That is so hard to do right now because Goldman Sachs doesn't want that competition. It's very simple. When you have someone from Goldman Sachs running the Treasury Department that will probably work for Goldman Sachs after, and they worked for them before, they're going to try to protect Goldman Sachs' interests. What does that look like? Create rules and regulation that make it very hard for other banks to compete with Goldman Sachs. You and I agree with that. We agree that the middle class is suffering for Trump's continuing to allow Goldman Sachs in there. Maybe we should both vote for Bernie Sanders. Well, so Elizabeth Warren. And again, it's important to remember it's not just a Republican or Democrat thing. Both parties allow Goldman Sachs to run the Treasury Department. But let me say this. Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders definitively would. Well, she might 1,024th allow it to be run, but 1,024th the Treasury Department might be run by someone from Goldman Sachs.
So while we still have a little bit of time, I want to make sure we talk about trade and tariffs. I suspect there might be some agreement, some disagreement here. I'll start with Charlie. Give us your take on Trump's trade policy, his tariffs that have had a big impact, particularly in the Midwest. Do you agree with it? Disagree? Tell us your take.
I have a more nuanced opinion on it. I think what he's doing with China is terrific. I think China has been an unfair actor on the world stage for far too long. They still are categorized as a developing nation in the World Trade Organization, which allows them access to subsidies. They build a coal-fired power plant every single month, which as soon as they exit as a developing nation, under that certification, it would be much more difficult to do that. Sam and I might actually agree on that. And look, China steals our IP. So the way it works in China is if you want to trade with them, you have to essentially form a partnership with the government. They'll copy your good or service, and then they'll sell it back into the market that you're competing in, probably quicker than it will take for you to manufacture back in that country. Generally, I'm a free trade guy, and if the goal is to get to low tariffs with some of these countries, I'm all for it. But with China, I consider them to be the great existential threat of the West and of America, and I totally and completely